with the consequence that there are increasing numbers of environmental refugees. As natural resources are depleted, poor communities are forced through necessity to overexploit their resources, the resources that remain, leading to yet further environmental destruction. Land is overcultivated, eroded, and reserves of wood or grass are used up. Unfortunately, as natural resources such as water that are essential for human life are used up, conflicts between individuals, communities, and even countries will become more frequent. Many of the conflicts we see today can be traced to disagreements over access to use of diminishing natural resources. Islamic Relief is a humanitarian relief and development organization that works with some of the world's poorest people. If we are to fulfill our commitment to provide support to these communities, we must work to ensuring environmental sustainability. If the Millennium Development Goals are to be met by 2015, it is integral that there are significant steps towards environmental sustainability. At present, around 10 million children die every year before their 5th birthday, most as a result of diseases such as malaria, diarrhea, and also malnutrition. Such diseases will become more widespread as a result of climate change. If the worldwide community is to meet the commitments of the MDGs, then it is essential that we act now on climate change. Not all strategies and policies are outdated, but a re-emphasis on certain priorities may be necessary. We need to work on the source, stopping climate change, for example, through advocacy, but also continue doing as much as we can with funds that donors enable us to, but with sustainability made more obvious. Islamic Relief is an organization inspired by the teachings of Islam. The Islamic environmental worldview is a holistic one and is based on the 5 aims of Sharia, which aim to protect religion, life, mind, offspring, and property. Yet, these are all directly or indirectly threatened by environmental degradation and climate change. Muslims are encouraged to reflect on the relationship between living organisms and their environment and to maintain the balance created by God. Mankind is the guardian of the earth and as such has a duty to protect it and also to ensure its posterity for future generations in the spirit of intergenerational equity. We believe that we have all a responsibility to maintain the balance of the earth, especially as disruption of this balance is causing widespread suffering amongst the world's poorest people. Protection of the environment is therefore crucial to Islamic Relief, both as one of our principles on which we are founded, but also because of its importance for poverty reduction. We believe that a stable climate and a rich environmental heritage are as important to communities as their material needs. We also believe that environmental conservation, socio-economic development, and emergency relief are interlinked, and these should be reflected in our activities, such as to promote environmental sustainability, integrating the principles of sustainable development into projects, preventing or reversing the loss of environmental resources, ensuring our own internal policies and practices are environmentally sound, and advocating for global change to protect the environment. I hope and pray that together, in partnership, we are able to protect this unique planet in which you have been entrusted for all generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saleh. And now for our 5th panelist. On my left-hand side, Dr. Anne Veneman. She's the Executive Director of UNICEF.
Is it on? It's with. Oh, great. Thank you very much. And I won't repeat all of what my fellow panelists have talked about, all very relevant. We heard this morning about the human impact of climate change. But I think it's very important to think about what that human impact really represents. Who are the vulnerable populations? They really are primarily women and children, in many cases, families, and impacted in so many different ways. We've talked today some about the impact on the health of children. There was a statement this morning that said malaria is the #1 killer of children, which isn't true. It's actually pneumonia followed by diarrhea. Diarrhea, a disease that comes in large part because of lack of clean water. In serious situations with floods, disaster-related cyclones, floods, and so forth, water systems are disrupted, oftentimes polluted by sewage systems coming together, putting children at even higher risk than they already are at diarrheal diseases, the second largest killer of children under 5. And so the risk of cholera and so forth in these disasters. So children's health certainly is put at risk because of climate change, and we have to incorporate this into all that we do. Likewise, education is often disrupted. Schools have so often been destroyed. One of the things that we try to do early on in humanitarian response is get children back into some kind of classroom setting. It is one of those things that restores their sense of normalcy, so important to do early on in disaster recovery. And as was pointed out, schools can, in a rebuilding process, can be built in a way to not only provide the schooling for the future, but be built so that they can provide shelter in cases of further disasters. The area of nutrition has been mentioned several times. Food availability, impacting the most vulnerable populations. Again, 2 million people in the world live on $2 a day or less. As the droughts impact the ability to produce food, the nutrition status of children in particular comes to the forefront. Children who do not get enough nutrition under the age of 2 will have long-term impacts on their cognitive ability, their ability to learn, their ability to earn. And so as we look at the issues of climate change and we look at the issues of how they impact food availability, nutrition security, I think we also have to look at the long-term potential impact on children from lack of adequate nutrition. Water has been mentioned several times. Again, water as being critical to life, clean water critical to prevent diarrheal diseases, so much of the cause of malnutrition in children. The other issue I think that's very important to look at is how do we really look at the protection of children issues that are related to climate-related disasters or weather-related disasters. Children are often the least able to protect themselves against a flood, against a tsunami. We know in the big tsunami in 2005, more children were lost than parents, primarily because they were too small to withstand the strength of the waves. So children being protected in the sense of when the disaster is happening. But these kinds of climate-related issues, whether it's desertification, lack of adequate water to sustain both crop and livestock agriculture, creating conflict impacts on children as well in very serious ways. They're put at the brunt of it. They're recruited as child soldiers. They're sexually exploited. And so this is what happens in conflict. And as the climate-related changes cause more conflict, water is becoming more and more scarce in many parts of the world, more likely to cause conflict. Trafficking of children, another big risk when you have weather-related disasters potentially and children and parents are separated. One of the things that was mentioned this morning was also the importance of looking at gender and looking at the impact on girls. Girls are often the ones that are not allowed to go to school if they can't afford to send all their children to school. If water becomes more scarce, it's often the girl who has to go fetch water farther and farther and farther away. When does she have time to go to school? So I think that when we look at the longer-term impacts, we have to look at the impact on the most vulnerable, and particularly children and women.